individuals on the call. So I think with that, one final reminder to please mute your mics when you're not speaking. And with that, I can hand it to you to start the June 2020 TPB meeting.
Thank you, Sergio. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the virtual meeting of the TPB Transportation Planning Board of the National Capital Region, Washington Council of Governments at noon on June 17, 2020. I'm Kelly Russell, chair of the TPB, and I call the meeting to order. I know by now we've all become pretty proficient in participating in virtual meetings, including muting and unmuting our microphones. I believe we here at the TPB have settled on a virtual meeting protocol that's worked well for us and you're familiar with. But for the sake of the record and for those who may be joining us for the first time, I'll review the procedures I'll be using. Talking about join us for the first time, a video broadcast of this virtual meeting is being made available on YouTube, another first for the TPB. So we're all going to be YouTube stars. Essentially, what you see on the screen and hear on the audio is what those watching the video cast on YouTube will see. So our staff pilot tested this last month and we are going live now. For my colleagues on the board, please keep the email you receive from Conti handy, as it is useful information on participating in the meeting and importantly, the process to follow in case of any technical disruptions during the session. So first, I'll ask Lynn to take a roll call of the members and alternates to document your presence at this meeting. So let's just say that second, in the interest of time, we will forego the staff presentations on items 3 and 5. These would be the report of the technical committee, the steering committee. Written reports have been provided and our read-ahead packet. Third, I will be inviting the chairs of the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Access for All Advisory Committee to present their reports. Written reports from these committees are also included in our read-ahead packet. Lastly, for each agenda item, I will have the presenter complete their presentation and then invite questions from members in turn by jurisdiction as we've done before. There are really no action items today other than accepting the minutes. A lot of good information though. A friendly reminder to please state your name and jurisdiction whenever you do speak. So Lynn, would you go ahead and take the roll call and confirm we have a quorum, please?
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So good afternoon, everyone. As I've done in the past, I'm going to read the jurisdiction, and if you could state your name, I'd appreciate it. If I miss you or go too fast, feel free to use the chat or email us. We should be able to catch everyone. We do also have a presentation list via WebEx. So here we go. District of Columbia, District Council, Phil Mendelson. Not here yet. District Council, Charles Allen.
Hi, this is Charles. I'm here.
Hello. District Council, Brandon Todd.
This is Sam Stevens, his alternate. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. District Department of Transportation. Anyone from that yet? No worries. I'm sure we'll catch you soon. District Office of Planning.
This is Kristen Calkins for Director Trueblood.
Thank you. On to Maryland, the City of Bowie. Charles County.
Jason Groth, alternate here.
Thank you. Holly Park.
Denise Mitchell, alternate here.
Thank you. Frederick County. Not yet. City of Frederick.
I'm here.
Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is here. Hello.
Hello. City of Greenbelt. Okay. City of Laurel.
Emmett is here because I saw him.
Yes.
Okay. We'll check through the chat or I'll tell him. Thank you. Montgomery County Council.
Evan Glass is here.
Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ehrenrich is here.
Hello, Gary. Prince George's County Council.
Hi, Denny Taveras. Councilmember Denny Taveras is here.
you. Prince George's County Executive.
Vic Weisberg, alternate, is here.
Vic.
Did you say Rockville, Lynn?
Yes, ma'am, Bridget, or you're here. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Thank you.
No worries. Tacoma Park.
Hi, Casey Kostick is here.
Hello. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis is here.
Hello. Maryland House. Maryland House.
Mark Corman is here.
Great, thank you. Now we'll move on to the state of Virginia. Alexandria.
Present.
Thank you. And it's Mr. Aguirre. I saw that you were in the thing, so I will go ahead and count that you're here. Arlington County.
And for Christian Dorsey.
Thank you. City of Fairfax. Fairfax.
James Walkinshaw here. Walter Alcorn's here too.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from Fairfax County? Okay, great. City of Falls Church.
David Snyder here.
Hello.
Hello.
Fauquier County. Okay, we have a couple from Loudoun County, so I'm going to start with Mr. Letourneau.
Bob Brown,
Bob
Brown, alternate for Mr. Letourneau.
Great, thanks. And then Loudoun County, Ms. Umstadt.
Yes, Kristen Umstadt here.
Thank you. City of Manassas.
Pam Savesky here.
Hello. City of Manassas Park. Okay, we have a couple from Prince William County. So is Miss Wheeler here?
Ann Wheeler here, yep.
Thank you. Is Mr. Angry here?
I believe he's going to come in late.
Okay, that's great. We'll keep an eye out for him. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Hamilton is here.
Oh, Renee. And then our seats for Virginia House and Senate are vacant. So I'm going to move on to WMATA.
Mark Phillips here for Sham Kanan.
Thanks, Mark. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration. I'll follow up with Sandra. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And the National Park Service.
Tammy Stidham is here.
Great, thanks, Tammy. Okay, Madam Chair, that concludes the roll call. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Lynn. We are next on to public comments. I do believe that we received one set of public comments. Lynn, would you mind reading that into the record?
Absolutely. Yes, we received one public comment from Mr. Kalai Kadaswamy, and he starts with, "Good morning," because we got it this morning. "I have been requesting to include slug pickup locations to the Commuter Connections website, outreach and promotional materials, and TPB's Visualize 2045. So far, I have not heard anything from TPB or Commuter Connections. Will the board be kind enough to take action to include slug lines to Commuter Connections and Visualize 2045? Thanks, Kalai Kadaswamy." That concludes the comments that we've received to date for today's meeting.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. I will mention I and the vice chairs are familiar with this matter, and staff has kept us well informed. I'm just wondering if Kanti, can you summarize what responses have been provided to Mr. Kandasamy?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Back in January, I spoke to the entire Citizens Advisory Committee about Commuter Connections program, what it is and their activities, and responded to the suggestions about providing information about slugging. And after the January meeting, I sent a couple other additional emails to the entire committee with additional information Before January last year, we had also communicated and provided information to Mr. Kandasamy. I also further notified the state departments of transportation who really oversee the commuter connections program. It's not a TPB program per se. And they have responded to Mr. Kandasamy. And I also understand that Commuter Connections has taken some actions. Commuter Connections Program Director Nick is on the line. So Nick, would you please update what actions Commuter Connections has taken?
Sure. Thanks, Conti. So probably we've been dealing with Mr. Kandasamy for several years now, and we did add information about slugging to the Commuter Connections website last summer. And about 2 years ago, we introduced a smartphone app that we presented to the TPB. It's called Carpool Now. And we released that so that it could be used for casual carpooling, and not just for commuting, but for really any trip purpose. We did add some enhancements to that program, and that's also outlined in one of the memos in the director's report that you'll hear about today. But one of the enhancements includes maps of park and ride lots and other locations, such as in the district and the Pentagon where carpools are formed, and these are major slugging areas. So not only have we added that to the app, but we've also customized a page on the Carpool Now website that shows all of these locations. And this literally just went up just a few weeks ago. And the app is now live in both the Play Store and for the iPhone as well. So that's all set to go.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate your responsiveness to Mr. Kandasamy, and hopefully the actions that we've taken will include this matter to his satisfaction. We shall see. But I appreciate the fact that there has been some good time and effort put into listening to his concerns and addressing them. So thank you very much. We'll move on now to approval of the May 20th, 2020 meeting minutes. May I have a motion? Yes, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair.
Hold on.
Yes, my apologies. I have received a chat from Ms. Taveras asking for a moment of personal privilege.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to include during the public comment piece, I just wanted to ask the chair, Ms. Russell, thank you for allowing me this moment for us to speak, but I wanted to see if it were possible for us to consider maybe as TPB sending a letter to the governor of Maryland and Greg Slater to encourage them to complete the negotiations with the PTLC to ensure that we expedite the completion and the moving forward of the Purple Line. Right at this time, we have lost a lot of precious time in the construction of the Purple Line due to the current negotiations and some of the issues that have taken place between the PTLC and the state. And at this time, the reality is that in light of the coronavirus, in light of the construction, I have, at least in my district, and I know I can speak for myself, my colleague, District 3 Councilmember Danielle Glaros, who has a bulk of the stops in Prince George's County, and other colleagues within Montgomery County, like Tom Hucker and so on, who will have a bulk of the stops. That the businesses in our areas were struggling pre-COVID-19 and now are basically in the brink of disaster. And so we're trying to see how fast we can bounce back from that. And so I think that the TPB can take a strong role to encourage and send a strong signal for them to to rectify the situation as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, to remedy the damage done with regards to the financing of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. I'm going to ask staff to take a look at it and work with the officers to see what might be appropriate. So thank you very much. I know everybody is struggling and we're really trying to get people up and running and back to some normalcy. So thank you very much.
No, and these businesses, I have over 400 businesses in the strip of maybe a half a mile. The reality is that these businesses were struggling for the last 2 years because of the construction. Now, on top of that, we have COVID-19. So we've got a lot on the line here. And so anything we can do to move the ball forward, I'd appreciate it, at least from TPB's end. Thank you, and COGS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. All right. Now we'll go ahead and move on to the approval of the minutes. And I did hear a motion from someone.
Madam Chair, Denise Mitchell, City College Park, so moved.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Pam Sebeski, Manassas City.
All right. And as before, I'm only going to ask if there are any abstentions or nays to expedite things. So are there any abstentions or nays from the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, WMATA, or other federal agencies? Okay, we will consider the minutes approved. Thank you very much. On to the technical committee report. As noted, we're not going to hear from staff. So are there any questions for Kyle, the chair of our technical committee? His written report is in our read ahead packet. We'll start with DC. Any questions? How about Maryland? Virginia? And WMATA or other agencies? Terrific. All right, now I'm excited to move on to the Citizens Advisory Committee and Access for All Advisory Committee reports. We have not really been able to hear from Ms. Abeles, our chairman of the CAC, for a while. So I'm excited to get her report, and I'm going to start by inviting her to share her summary of the committee's discussions last month. Nancy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. There you are.
Thank you. Greetings, everybody. Nice to be back. The 2020 CAC met for an online meeting on Thursday, June 11th. Our discussions covered 2 items on today's agenda: transit access focus areas and safety study recommendations. So first, to transit access focus areas, John Swanson, TPB Transportation Planner, presented about the regional transit access focus area list as identified by the Transit Within Reach project. And he said that these locations are opportune for improving pedestrian and bicycle access for transit. They not only support Visualize 2045 initiatives, they also support related projects like TLC and TAP. And CAC members viewed this list most positively, as PED and bike access to transit and path networks in general are important to many of our members, our home jurisdictions, and locales. And then the safety study. John Sherman, TPB Transportation Planner, briefed us on further developments with recommendations for reducing fatalities and serious injuries in the region based on findings of the Regional Safety Study and Outreach. And Pam Beer from Cambridge Systematics also contributed to the presentation. Brian Hayes, TPB Transportation Manager, reminded us that we've been discussing transportation safety for over a year, and that many recommendations from the study reflect our comments from discussions, which have been enthusiastically driven by both advocacy and direct knowledge. And our comments include a call for region-wide Vision Zero programs, as well as localized safety study plans. The committee briefly discussed why people drive without seatbelts. We also talked about equity issues related to a focus on drivers rather than pedestrians when discussing impacts of behavior on safety. Our thoughts on equity reflected both pedestrian or biker vulnerabilities for equity emphasis areas, and populations who must access transit from beyond walk sheds or who must drive if they are, for example, shift workers, including essential workers who live in exurbs beyond any reasonable transit access. The committee suggested that we revisit this topic again in even greater depth at our July committee meeting so we can continue to discuss the recommendations before they go before the board for approval. Then we received a briefing on the VRE MARC run-through service, which you were briefed on last month. And Nicole McCall, TPB Transportation Planner, provided a high-level summary of the market assessment and technical considerations for the run-through service. She addressed questions and concerns we had submitted before the meeting via a questionnaire. Through the questionnaire, we expressed general support for the run-through service, seeing that it would help unite the region, attract new riders, and provide needed operational redundancy to the system. We encourage the TPB to continue to explore this topic. For those of us who might have marveled, why hasn't this been considered before, it was good to learn that it has been and that it's being further evaluated. Other business. I then walked the committee through the May TPB meeting agenda and discussions. And next, we all thanked Theodore Willett for his service on the committee. He's leaving for a job in Pittsburgh with the National Urban League, and we will greatly miss him. Then Lynn Erickson, TPB Plan Development and Coordination Program Director, walked the committee through today's TPB agenda. Lastly, Brian Hayes, TPB Transportation Planner, began a presentation on updates to the participation plan. Unfortunately, the presentation was cut short due to time constraints to adjourn the meeting, and we're planning on an extra online session of the CAC to continue the presentation and accommodate discussion, to which we're all looking forward to as a reflection of our own mission. Thank you, Madam Chair, and if I can answer any questions for anybody, I'm happy to.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for your continued commitment, all of you who do this volunteer work. We're very, very much appreciative of it. Are there any questions for Nancy? We'll start with the District of Columbia. Maryland. Virginia. WMATA and others. Great, well done. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, it's Bridget Newton from Rockville. I'd just like to say thank you to Nancy and the committee.
Thank you. Thank you on behalf of the committee, Bridget. We appreciate you. I now will invite our colleague, Casey Kostick, Chair of the Access for All Advisory Committee, to share her summary of the committee's discussions this month. And the same comments apply. Thank you so much for continuing this important work. Casey?
Thank you. Yes, it's great to hear from you, Nancy, and the CAC. The AFA had our first meeting virtually since we have been unable to meet in person. We met on June 2nd, and we focused on two primary topics. The first of which was the TPB participation plan, which it sounds like the CAC began to discuss but didn't thoroughly get through. In our case, we were able to discuss more thoroughly, and the focus of the presentation we received from Mr. Brian Hayes was on the participation policy, which includes the policy statement, policy principles, and policy goals. And AFA members then discussed and provided some feedback on whether the goals, principles, and constituencies serve as a good foundation for making sure the participation activities are inclusive, as well as making sure that the guidance on how the public can get involved addresses the concerns and perspectives of the AFA. And some of the things that the committee noted were the importance of having more audio options available so that people with vision impairments are able to access the information. There was a recommendation to include a policy on the method of delivery that addresses regional differences and information accessibility for people with disabilities, and also the need to reach people who haven't participated previously. The presentation concluded with the ways that the public can get involved with TPB and next steps, which are going to include a draft participation plan, a public comment period, and TPB approval in the fall. Then the other topic that we focused on was connected and autonomous vehicles. And I shared some of the takeaways from my participation in the first TPB Connected and Autonomous Vehicles webinar, which was held in early May. And then we had a presentation from Ms. Stacy Cook, who presented on some of the TPB activities related to connected and autonomous vehicles, including a forthcoming white paper and an overview of connected and autonomous vehicles at the federal, state, and regional levels and the roles of those different agencies. We also heard some results of a recent TPB survey, including a number of responses from AFA members. And some of the main areas that were expressed by members as concerns were safety and equity as the development of connected and autonomous vehicles continues. There was specifically a survey question that was developed for the AFA survey respondents that asked about considerations for older adults and people with disabilities. And safety really emerged as a main concern that people raised on the survey. We also then discussed some additional aspects related to AVs and connected vehicles, including concerns about interaction between different levels of automation, the importance also of not being afraid of technology and the opportunities it provides to improve equity. The importance of policies that are focused on requirements for universal design and accessibility as these new technologies are being developed, and also concerns about hacking. And then we just finished up with some other business, and we are looking ahead to our next meeting on July 7th, which we will also hold virtually. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Casey. Are there any questions? And we'll start with, again, with the district. Maryland, Virginia, WMATA, and others. Great. Thank you both for excellent reports and for continuing, again, the excellent work that you're doing. And however we can support you, we're here for you. Thanks. All right, on to the steering committee actions and report of the director. Do we have any questions for Conti? His written report is in our read ahead packet. We'll start with the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, and WMATA and other agencies. All right, everybody's reports have been very thorough. Thank you much. Moving on to chairman's remarks, I do have an announcement to make in just a minute, but before that, please indulge me for a few moments to make some brief remarks, brief but heartfelt, and I hope they resonate for all of you. As fellow humans living and working together in our communities, it really is our responsibility and our obligation to conduct our daily activities thoughtfully, with fairness and respect for one another. Here at COG and the TPB, this credo is reflected in our conscious effort to strive for equity in our work, in the products we produce, in the processes we utilize. I can't overstate the importance of ensuring that equity is an integral part of our thinking, our conversations, and our actions. However, the reality is that we have much more work to do. The events across the region, the country, and around the world following the senseless murder of George Floyd at the hands of a police officer has, in recent weeks, brought this deficiency into much sharper focus. I want to assure you that we at the TPB will not just continue our commitment to equity, we will work diligently and deliberately to enhance our conscious efforts toward equity in all we do. I'm sure each of you will continue to do the same thing as you support your jurisdictions, your communities, and agencies in developing plans and programs focused on providing fair and equitable transportation and mobility and meeting accessibility needs of the residents and travelers in this region. Thank you for indulging me. Now on to the announcement. One of our colleagues on the board will be retiring and moving on to greener pastures, or as we call them, pervious surfaces. Renee Hamilton, VDOT's Deputy District Administrator, will be retiring from VDOT after 32 years of service. Congratulations on all of your accomplishments, Renee. I understand you started at VDOT as an engineer in training and have worked on almost all different functions of the state DOT. We have really appreciated your participation in metropolitan planning and programming here at the TPB over the past 10 years. And by way of expressing our thanks, we do have a certificate. I cannot present it to you right this second. We'll get it to you, but it does read this. The National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments hereby presents this recognition of gratitude and esteem to Renee Hamilton for her distinguished service to the TPB and to the people of this region as TPB member from 2011 through 2020. Renee, as this is your last TPB meeting, would you like to share any thoughts with us?
Sure, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to say thank you and to the board for this. It has truly been a pleasure being on this board for the last 10 years. I am wearing my I-66 Transform I-66 t-shirt. I think that was one of our significant things that we did while I was on this board, and it just shows what we can do as a region when we work together. I just want to thank all the members on the board for making this definitely a learning opportunity for me. And at the same time, just thanking them for continuing the work to make this region a great place to live, work, and play. And so I am not leaving the transportation industry, so you will possibly see me in the audience from time to time. But thank you. And I just want to thank Chuck and Conti and Lynn and the entire staff at TPB for their support over the years. So this isn't goodbye, it's just I'll see you later on the other side.
Well, thanks again for your very thoughtful participation. I know you've been a steadying force in many of these discussions. So we wish you all of the best and do stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we'll move on now to item number 7, the safety recommendations. This item is one we have been eagerly waiting for and our staff has been working on for the past year. John Sherman on our staff will present us with a draft set of recommendations on actions that the TPB and each of its members can take to significantly reduce the fatalities and serious crashes on the region's roadways. I will note that these are draft recommendations for us to consider. Today, we will receive the recommendations, get some things clarified, and share our thoughts. Next month is when I will be asking the board to take action. We will use the time between these meetings to get additional clarifications from staff and pass on other suggestions, all of which we will consider and then act on next month. So I would ask John to go ahead, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I know I had a mic check before the meeting, but I just have to ask, am I heard? Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have reviewed the results of the regional safety study at the last 2 meetings of the board. And just a couple of words here first. So a key step the consultants took on the safety study was to analyze the crash data at a high level. This was our phase 1 analysis, and you reviewed the results of that analysis at the April meeting. And this high-level analysis told us things like how many fatalities have occurred, where they occurred geographically, what types of crashes were most common, what types of roadways they occurred on, and many other things, including the factors contributing to most of our region's fatal and serious injury crashes, such as not wearing seatbelts, crashes where a vehicle hits a pedestrian, and so on, many different factors. However, within this complex mix of contributing factors and crash types, 3 of them are revealed to have a disproportionately large effect on fatalities and serious injuries. And these were crashes with pedestrians, crashes at or near intersections, and crashes along major arterials. And this informed our deeper dives, where we took a close look at each of these disproportionate factors, and you were briefed on the results of those deeper dives during the May meeting. And based on all of this analysis, the consultant team led by Cambridge Systematics and under the guidance of our technical advisory panel, which includes Tim Kearns from the Maryland Highway Safety Office, Shoma Day of the District Department of Transportation, and Stephen Reed of the Virginia Department of Transportation. Under their advice, then identified a broad range of countermeasures that have been proven effective at reducing fatal and serious crashes. And these countermeasures, which I will touch on later, help to change people's behavior through education or enforcement, and or to create safer infrastructure through engineering. Education, enforcement, engineering.
You're a member of AARP too.
Are three of the E's of safety. There are some other E's as well, as were pointed out by Mr. Weisberg and others last month, which are evaluation and equity. These E's are particularly important to consider during the planning and implementation of safety programs. And they are also reflected in the proposed recommendations. And please go on to the next slide. So during calendar year 2019, this board requested and received, this board has been working to address roadway safety for a long time, especially via the support you have provided to our annual Street Smart campaigns. And in early 2018, during your deliberations on adopting the region's first ever set of federally required safety targets, you made it very clear that the number of fatalities and serious injuries in our region is unacceptable. And so during calendar year 2019, this board requested and received briefings from our 3 state DOTs on what they are doing to address roadway fatalities and serious injuries. Also in 2019, you commissioned the Regional Roadway Safety Study. And this study conducted a high-level assessment of our region's data, which revealed that several underlying behavioral factors contribute to our unacceptable safety outcomes, and these are not wearing seatbelts, speeding, impaired driving, and distracted driving. These behaviors were also highlighted during the briefings of the state DOTs last year. Furthermore, the study also revealed that 3 types of crashes account for a disproportionate share of fatalities, which are crashes with pedestrians, crashes at or near intersections, and crashes along major arterials. And today, you are examining what actions to take to improve safety on our roads. So go to the next slide, please. So what are the recommendations? You can go to the next slide. The proposed recommendation is that the TPB adopt a resolution. And this resolution would be in 4 parts. The first part, shown here, is where the TPB urges its members to reaffirm their commitment to roadway safety as a top priority, and furthermore, to take actions to increase seatbelt use, reduce speeding, reduce impaired driving, and reduce distracted driving. These actions can be implemented through projects, institution of policies, or other actions, and all of these actions should be identified and implemented in a fair and equitable way. We know from the data and from the presentations that MDOT, DDOT, and VDOT made last year that driver behavior is a factor in most of the fatal and serious injury crashes, both in our region and in the broader territories of our member states. This part of the proposed resolution puts the TPB on the record as wanting its members to really commit to taking the actions needed to do these 4 things. Actions taken to increase seatbelt use, reduce speeding, and reduce distracted and impaired driving are generally applicable. They will benefit the entire region, and if progress is made on them, they make all the other factors related to fatal and serious injury crashes less devastating. As Kurt Erickson from the Washington Regional Alcohol Program explained last month, one of the best things you can do to protect yourself from an impaired driver is to wear your seatbelt. Similarly, a driver has more time to react and avoid a crash if he or she is not driving too fast. More time to avoid that pedestrian who may or may not be in the crosswalk. More time to avoid another driver who may be under the influence. If we can make progress on these 4 behaviors, we will see less fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways. These are actions the TPB would be calling out that are specific and yet have general regional applicability. Please go to the next slide. We know that the factors contributing to fatal and serious injury crashes are complex, and therefore the actions needed to address them are also complicated. In this second part of the proposed resolution, the TPB urges its members to commit to working individually and or collectively to implement the broad range of safety measures developed as part of this study. And this refers to all of the 50 or so countermeasures that are outlined in the handout. And Sergio, at this point, I'd like you to pull up that document. And scroll to the second page, please. So this document is where we list the range of safety countermeasures that, if we could implement more of them throughout the region, we would move our numbers in the right direction. They are either proven to be effective, have strong evidence of their effectiveness, are very likely to be effective according to the expert opinion of the consultant team, or suggested by our state safety officials on our technical advisory panel. And one might ask why we need so many. It certainly would be more convenient if we could pick out just a few and say that we need to simply apply these across the region. It would be helpful if the underlying factors contributing to the fatalities and serious injuries that we see were such that by applying just a few targeted actions, we really could make a significant dent in the numbers. So as an example for why we need to include all of these countermeasures, let's consider the fatalities that occur because a driver hits a pedestrian. We know that the data show that lack of visibility in the evenings, especially during the winter months, increases the likelihood of drivers hitting pedestrians. We also know that a preponderance of pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries occur in the roadway, yet not at an intersection. We also know that drivers over the age of 84 are involved in more pedestrian fatal and serious injury crashes than any other age group. And we know lots of other things about pedestrian crashes as well. The point is, because there are so many factors involved in pedestrian crashes, we need a variety of countermeasures to address them, depending on the particular situation that we're looking at. Because we know that visibility is a factor in some proportion of crashes where a driver hits a pedestrian, one of the countermeasures listed here about halfway down the page is install lighting at intersection and mid-block crossings to ensure motorists can see pedestrians crossing the road at locations with high pedestrian crashes. We also know that many pedestrians are killed in the roadway, but not at an intersection. There's a strategy here about a quarter of the way down the page that says, evaluate mid-block crossings with higher rates of fatalities and serious injuries, especially those over 10,000 annual average daily traffic, to determine the need for more improvements such as medians, refuge islands, pedestrian hybrid beacons, and rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And Sergio, if you can scroll maybe to page 4 next. And just to continue the example, because we know that drivers over the age of 84 account for a high proportion of pedestrian fatalities, there are 2 countermeasures listed about a third of the way down on this page. The first one is provide public information, education, and training for older drivers on risks associated with signalized intersections, such as red light running, speeding, not yielding to pedestrians, and difficulty judging speed and distance of approaching vehicles and making left turns. And then right below that, perhaps something that we could do is conduct a study to determine the safety needs of older adults in the region and coordinate internally and externally to provide information on transportation alternatives other than driving. And we already have programs that work with transportation alternatives. So this could be something that we could work together with the programs that are already existing. Anyway, these are just examples. We have 13 or so countermeasures listed in for pedestrian-oriented crashes, and member jurisdictions can look at their particular situation and find that there is a menu that they can choose from. And this story is similar for crashes at or near intersections and crashes along major arterials, and that's why this part of the proposed resolution urges members to apply any and/or all of the countermeasures needed. And Sergio, could you go back to the presentation now? So this part of the resolution provides this menu of solutions that can address specific crash types, locations, and/or contributing factors. It complements the more general recommendations outlined in Part 1 that apply equally across the region. And could you go to the next slide, please? In this third part of the proposed resolution, the TPB would establish a regional roadway safety program, which can assist its member jurisdictions and the region to implement projects, programs, or policies to improve safety outcomes for roadway users. Again, making sure that we do so in a fair and equitable way. This proposed program will be modeled loosely on the Transportation Land Use Connections Program, with assistance from the 3 state DOTs, and is proposed to have a roughly $250,000 annual budget, $150,000 from the UPWP, and $100,000 in total from our 3 state DOTs. So this is where the TPB puts its money where its mouth is, so to speak. Basically, this program will support our member jurisdictions by providing technical assistance. Next slide, please. So this fourth and last part of the proposed resolution is where the TPB calls upon its member jurisdictions to adopt Vision Zero policies and or develop local roadway safety plans. Again, being deliberate about doing each of these in a fair and equitable way. And also for our member states, calling on them to adopt primary seatbelt legislation and increase the use of ignition interlock devices for impaired driving offenders. And then go to the next slide, please. So those were the 4 main components of the proposed resolution. And this slide talks a little bit about the part 3, which is our proposed regional roadway safety program. This identifies some of the it's only an illustrative list, but these are some of the types of things, projects that could be done with this program. We could assist our member jurisdictions with crash data analysis. We have pulled together a regional crash database now, and that could be helpful for our member jurisdictions. We can help to provide consultant services to facilitate local road safety audits, and that is one of the countermeasures listed in that document is to do that. We could support additional street smart-like activities with street teams and virtual reality cars for member jurisdictions outside of the spring and fall campaigns. I think it was suggested at the previous meeting that we might be able to do analysis of equity impacts of roadway safety measures across the region. We could also support or sponsor a regional safest driver contest. San Antonio presented that to the technical committee last year, but other cities in the country have done similar programs. We could support jurisdictions as they work to create their local roadway safety plans. We could facilitate or conduct regional safety peer exchanges and or training programs. And we could facilitate educational outreach on safety and other things. This is only an illustrative list. Next slide, please. So, as Chair Russell mentioned earlier, we realize that we're going to hear from you now about what you think about this, what suggestions you have for improvement, and also over the course of the next few weeks. And so we will work with you to finalize a proposed resolution based on all that feedback. And then we'll come back, and the plan at least is to come back in July and request adoption of the resolution. And with that, I'm welcome to take any questions.
Thank you so much, John. Before I invite questions, I just would like to reiterate my earlier remarks about TPB working diligently and deliberately to consciously integrate equity considerations in everything we do. And I would like to recommend that we add the following language to the document of safety strategies being recommended, and also in the resolution that we will be asking staff to bring us next month. Sergio, can you put the language up on the screen, please? Every action TPB considers, every debate we have, and every decision we make as the region's MPO must be viewed through the lens of equity, fairness, and non-discrimination. Past actions that have been exclusionary or had disparate impacts on underrepresented communities must be recognized, and actions taken to correct or mitigate the resulting unfairness. From infrastructure to education and enforcement, we must act fairly, without partiality or prejudice, to ensure all people have true access to safe and equitable mobility. The TPB officers and staff are committed to this mission. And with that, I will open the floor to comments and questions. We'll try and do this in an orderly way. Let's try and start with the District of Columbia.
All right, go back on.
Are there any questions from members in the District of Columbia? Okay, we'll go to Maryland.
Hi, this oh, go ahead.
It's Emmett Jordan out in Greenbelt, Maryland. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the good work, hard work that's gone on. So on slide number 4, the listing of behaviors, are they ranked from most impactful to least impactful? So seatbelt use, increasing that would have the greatest impact.
They were not put in rank order. We know that seatbelt use or not wearing seatbelts is one of the primary factors in fatal crashes. So I think that it's fair to say that's at the top, but the other ones I did not put in any particular order. They're all really important.
Yes, they are all really important. It might be helpful, though, to include some sort of a ranking or just either which has, if some have increased or decreased over time, just which the ones that we're emphasizing ranking might be helpful. Or perhaps the ease of implementation would be another criteria or guideline for listing them on the page. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Hi, this is Casey Kostick from Tacoma Park. I have 2 comments / questions. The first is, I think this seems like it is, you know, on the right track, and I know it has been very, very hard to pull this all together, and it's hard to really determine what it is that we can do to effectively improve safety. And I think this is really moving us in the right direction. So thank you very much. One of the things I wonder about is whether it would be possible to include some sort of reporting mechanism so that we have a built-in system for receiving reports on the progress, and we can make sure that we're sort of assessing how our work is, how effective our work is on this, and whether there needs to be further steps in the future. So I wonder if there's a way to build that into either the resolution or the plan, the work plan specifically, or the proposed working group that you suggested. And then secondly, and not directly related to this, but I strongly support the inclusion of the equity statement that Chair Russell recommended. And I would like for us to think about moving forward, considering having an equity impact statement or equity impact consideration added to our agenda items. That's something that in Tacoma Park we have on each of our agenda items. We have a fiscal impact statement, an environmental impact statement, and a racial equity impact statement. And it's definitely been a challenge to always have effective and accurate information in those sections, but I think it has helped us focus more on ensuring that our decisions are equitable and that we're taking those things into consideration.
Thank you.
This is Gary Ehrenrich, and I do want to comment and thank specifically John and Conti for working with the technical committee, and I've spent some time with them as well to go over this the resolution and its contents, and it looks very promising. I would like to also stress that the INVEST Act, which the House of Representatives is discussing today, does include language, I believe includes language that deals with what we have to deal with every year, and with the Highway Safety Performance Report and monitoring, and that the numbers can't be increasing. They have to show significant progress in declining of fatalities and serious injuries. So I think this is on target, and I think we're going to see if the legislation passes as it was introduced, significant more emphasis on safety.
This is Vic Weisberg. I just wanted to add to what my colleagues said, and just thank John, thank TPB for this robust initiative and putting it together, and adding inclusion of elements like evaluation, but really importantly, adding equity to the prism of how we look at everything. And I want to thank our chair for her amendment, because I think that's very on point. So I just want to appreciate this really, really terrific and robust effort.
Thank you, Vic. Anybody else from Maryland?
Yes, Kelly, this is Earl Lewis. I think this is a really strong recommendation. I like the resolutions. I think the fact that we can use federal planning funds to support the funding of this will make it something that we should be able to move forward with pretty quickly. So thank you to the team to put this together, and thanks to you, Kelly, for your leadership on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else from Maryland before we move on to Virginia? Maryland's chatty today. Virginia.
Hi, it's Walter Alcorn from Fairfax County. I just want to make sure in the resolution that we are calling out some of those very important road design issues that were flagged in the report. I didn't see that explicitly listed there, but I know certainly in Fairfax County, we're spending a lot of time on improving roadway designs for pedestrian safety. So, John, is there anything in there is that buried in maybe part 2, or maybe it should be explicit at some point?
Yeah, I think there is in that attached document with all the recommendations, the 50 or so in there. There is quite a few that are, engineering oriented. We are very welcomed if you review that and find, ideas that might be missing, or another idea that you think would be good to include. We'd be, happy to have that conversation over the next week or 2, so we can get that updated before we actually finalize the language.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely take a look at that, and if I see anything, I'll let you know. But I do want to make sure that we're clearly calling out. I mean, for us, roadway design, I know is one of the big areas of focus. So, thank you. It's an excellent report.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna skip back to the District of Columbia, because I understand Mr. Allen has had some audio issues. So I think he's back with us and had some comments, and then when he finishes, we'll go back to Virginia. Mr. Allen?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it. John, thank you and to everybody for their work on this. I think this really, as we've talked about in the past, really takes a data-driven approach and analysis of how we look across the whole region. So thank you very much. I also want to thank everybody with the TPB team and leadership as we work to kind of keep working on this and be able to have the back and forth to help us think through all of these different policy recommendations. I think a lot of them really dovetail very well with some of the efforts, at least from the district's perspective, that we're trying to work on. Later in early July, we'll be taking up our Vision Zero legislation at the council, which got put on pause for a couple of months, understandably, as we all had to scale back our actions, COVID related. And the mayor's actually already moved forward a couple of these, for example, reducing the default speed limit down to 20 miles per hour. So I think this really can dovetail really well with a lot of the policy work. There is one element I wanted to ask you a quick question, John, because I was a little confused. And this is where there's a kind of intersection between, I also chair the council's Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, and I believe we had some conversations around one of the recommendations that I thought was not going to be included, but I thought I heard you talk about it in the presentation, and that is that we would have, one of the recommendations would be that making seatbelt infractions a primary reason why law enforcement can pull someone over. And in particular, as we are trying to make sure that we are re-examining our laws and our policy. This is an area that we've seen stops that are disproportionate against communities of color. And so we want to be very thoughtful around what type of recommendations we have regarding law enforcement pulling over and creating and initiating stops. So I just want to ask, so I thought that was not going to be a part of the recommendation in the presentation, if you could kind of answer that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Allen. So we did receive your input on that, but we also received input from some others about one. And so, and again, Conti can weigh in as well. I think the idea was that we would present it as a strategy that works, and that, but should it be included or not would be a discussion for board members, at your level to work through.
If I could also add, Mr. Allen, that particular strategy, as it were, is currently on the books in the district and Maryland. So it's not there in Virginia. There was, from the safety engineering and the safety experts' perspective, this sort of inconsistent approach, particularly in an interconnected region where there are people commuting from one part to the other, particularly poses an issue in terms of getting people to adhere to one particular type of behavior or safety practice. And so it was only in Virginia where it is currently not in place, and there appeared to be some openness in Virginia for considering it. And then Chairman Russell has noted already today and earlier as well that with safety, there are engineering solutions, there are education strategies, and those would probably be the ones that we would lead with. We would not immediately go to enforcement as our preferred strategy. We should do everything we can in engineering the roads. We should be everything we can do in terms of building awareness and educating the public. But as a strategy, some degree of enforcement, ensuring that it is done in an equitable manner, was the topic that we wanted to hear about. Clearly,
I very much appreciate that. And I do agree that we want to try to get across the region to kind of a standardization. I'll say in the district, the conversation is actually to undo what we have, which is that allows that seatbelt to be the primary reason to then initiate a stop. And when we have, now that we've been collecting several years worth of stop data, what we're finding in the district is that we have a wildly disproportionate number of Black drivers that are pulled over versus white. And we're very mindful of, for residents of color, what that police interaction is and the way that we see very disproportionate stops. And certainly as I really appreciated the chair's conversation in her remarks, we're really trying to make sure that we are viewing things with a racial equity lens. And I think the role in which our enforcement regime plays in with our safety is just an important one that we need to think about. And perhaps that's for the next meeting to kind of wrestle with how we try to strike that, where we certainly want the best engineering and we want to make sure that we have all the safety standards in the right place, but to be very cognizant and aware of as we're trying to think through, where are we maybe in the name of intentions around a safety focus, but we might be unintentionally creating interactions with law enforcement that are not what we're trying to create. So just wanted to raise that. I appreciated the conversation, and perhaps we can wait till next month when we have action in front of us to think about this, and certainly happy to work with you over the next couple of weeks to see how we can try to land in the right spot. Thank you all very much. And again, thanks for the work on this. Also, the one issue that I'm flagging, this is really great work, and I think is just really thoughtful and helps us all move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And I would ask everybody to consider the thoughts that you've expressed as we contemplate moving this forward to next month's meeting. I think you have some valid points, and we need to contemplate that. So thanks, I appreciate it. Okay, we're going to move back to Virginia and see if there are any more questions or comments.
Loudoun County.
Loudoun County. Who is this?
This is Kristen Umstadt. Thank you, Madam Chair. When I'm looking at the equity issue, we have quite a few residents in Loudoun who do not own cars and they rely on either walking or bicycling. I would be interested in seeing whether the fatal or serious injury crashes involving pedestrians happen during nighttime hours or during daytime hours. If anyone has any ideas about any kind of public information campaign we could put out to encourage people either to wear light clothing, or I'm trying to be mindful that not everybody can afford to buy extra clothing. But if there is some way to make folks more visible when they're either biking or when they are walking at night, that would be helpful. Kirkland, Washington has a system that there are buckets of brightly colored yellow flags on both sides of a crosswalk that people are encouraged to pick up and carry from one side to another. We could certainly do message boards. We could certainly try to encourage more use of public transportation, but to be honest, in Loudoun, our buses don't go all night long. But some of our workers need to get to evening jobs. So I'm just looking for ideas from other folks around the region who might have some idea how we do a better job protecting those folks in our communities who don't have a whole lot of resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Dan Mallett from Arlington.
Go ahead.
I want to thank Kristen for those comments. I do want to just caution that we should be careful about any recommendations that are along the lines of requiring people to wear special uniforms or carry special equipment in order to go about walking in our communities. I think that is a challenging direction to go down with a lot of implications. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Snyder.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for your leadership and the proposed statement on equity. Certainly support that. This is a really groundbreaking work, and it is significant, multifaceted work to deal with a significant and multifaceted issue. A couple of the comments that have made today, I wanted to make some suggestions. The first is that I think we need more strictly on how pedestrians can protect themselves. It's critical that we have drivers protect pedestrians, but making sure that we've got some things in there of good practices for pedestrians. For example, you don't want to be distracted by your cell phone when you're walking across the street. So the distraction applies whether you're driving or walking. So that may suggest some minor amendments. The second point I wanted to make is to address Councilmember Allen's question. I think it's indisputable from safety sources that primary enforcement safety belt laws, not only in the front and the rear, actually do save lives and do prevent significant injuries. I think the way we can perhaps deal with the equity issue is to make a comment along the lines of being careful in our regulation of policing that we don't have a kind of impacts that people are concerned about. So I would hope that we could keep the recommendation. The fact is that primary enforcement seatbelt laws do save lives. They're far more effective than secondary, but also take accurate and fair cognizance of the concerns that Councilmember Allen suggests. So hopefully between now and then, we can work out some language. I really want to end where I began, which is this is literally a life and death issue. The Council of Governments has not only sought a one-time study, one of the best that I think maybe exists out there, and a series of recommendations, but also has the follow-up mechanism to make sure that things are actually done. In connection with that, I hope that we will have some further discussion later on as to what we can recommend to our legislatures, particularly those like Maryland and Virginia, and of course the DC City Council that may be considering these, and Maryland and Virginia at the beginning of next year. Finally, I had a question. We seem to be having a large number of commercial vehicle crashes around the region. And somewhere in this report, I think we need to deal with that, particularly on certain parts of the Beltway. So let me really end where I began, which is thanks to all concerned, Madam Chair. Thanks for your leadership, the leadership of this board, an incredible amount of work on a critical issue. And I look forward to voting for it in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Anyone from Virginia?
Hi, Kelly, Pam Sebesky, Manassas City. I just want to say that I think this is, I want to thank you for your leadership. Thanks to the COG staff for all the hard work on this. It's definitely important that all of this information that we've talked about, and to not go over things that have already been said, but say I really appreciate the diverse, thoughtful conversation, and making decisions are always better when we have so many different minds at work at looking at all of this. So I just want to thank everyone for the input.
Thank you for that. Anyone else from Virginia? And anybody from WMATA or other federal agencies? Any questions?
Yeah, hi, Chair Russell. This is Mark Phelps from WMATA in for Sham Kanan. I just want to briefly, second or third, fourth, whatever it might be, your comment on the equity text or the equity recommendation, as well as Casey Kostek's recommendation for an equity impact assessment for TPB actions. I think that's a fantastic idea. Germane, particularly to the safety recommendations, this isn't necessarily a comment for John or the team's work, but more of a general caution, I think, for jurisdictions when they're looking at how to implement some of this. I think it's probably pretty that is not on my end. It should probably be pretty obvious, but I think it pays to point out that, as Councilman Allen pointed out about different priorities, that things like road diets should be targeted judiciously, because they can sometimes forego things like bus priority lanes or other prioritization treatments. So these are great recommendations, but they do need to be viewed on the implementation side in terms of other competing needs and priorities.
Great points. Thank you very much. And I'm just, because this is so important, I'm going to go one more time around the circle and see if anybody else, if you have a question before we wrap up. I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity on this. Okay, thank you. And John, thank you very much. Thank you to all the staff who have worked on this. Just to note that, you know, it's difficult work because there are human beings behind each of these numbers, and to immerse yourself so deeply in this work I know is challenging, and so I appreciate that. And we're doing some good work that hopefully will save some lives. So again, thank you so much. And we'll move on to the National Capital Trail Network. The last item, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Let me back up. Onto the transit access focus areas. My apologies. The next two items we will be briefed on are ways in which we can realize a few of the aspirational initiatives we adopted in 2018 as part of the region's long-range transportation plan, Visualize 2045. I believe it was under Charles Allen's chairmanship that we directed staff to undertake these work activities. John Swanson will brief us on the results of the work that our staff has done over the past 18 months working with the staffs of your transportation agencies. What excites me most about this is the simple and relatively low-cost manner in which we can make public transportation a more viable, more attractive mode of travel. Public transportation is critical, and it is a huge investment we have made and continue to make every year. We need to take full advantage of this investment. It's also a great sustainable way to meet our mobility demands while promoting the livability and the prosperity of the region. And we will be taking action on this next month. John, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me okay.
We can.
Excellent. Well, this is a great setup. Thank you, Chair Allen, for that. And actually, it's I think really fortuitous for this item to be following the safety discussion, because with this is ultimately about safety for people who walk and bike. We're talking specifically about people who walk and bike to transit, but the kinds of improvements we're promoting here are important for all people who walk and bike everywhere in the region. So we've identified a list of transit access focus areas. I'll call those TAFAs, as part of the Transit Within Reach study that we've been conducting for the last year and a half. We have 49 of these locations where we think there's a lot of opportunity to improve walking and biking access to public transit. So that's what I'm going to be talking with you about. Before I get started, though, I want to acknowledge the work of Charlene Howard, who's been my partner and staff in pulling this work together, as well as Nicole McCall. Nicole and Charlene have done the technical work for this, and we're indebted to them. I also want to acknowledge the support that we've gotten from our member jurisdictions. We've talked with all of you, many of you on a repeated basis, so it's been super helpful. And sort of bigger picture, really, I think it's important for me to acknowledge the visioning and the planning activities that COG and the TPB have done. This is really sort of building upon that work. We've the TPB has created, I think, a regional consensus around the concept of activity centers, and even more specifically around the idea that we need to make sure that activity centers are places where walking and biking is an easy way to get around. And really, we're talking about land use here. We're talking about the land around station areas, not about the stations themselves. We've calculated in this region, I'll just give some context before I get started, that there's, this region's 4,000 square miles. We often mention that point. We've calculated that there's about 130 square miles of land within half a mile of high capacity transit, either now or there will be by 2030. So that's about 3%. We're talking about that land in this project. That's a tremendous regional asset. It offers a lot of opportunity for folks to get access to the things they need without jumping in a car. And we want people, whenever possible, to be able to walk or bike to a train, or simply within an activity center or an area that is walkable and friendly to peds and bikes. So that's my setup. Next slide, please. First things first, we've made a lot of progress. The great news is that folks in this region have incredible expertise and have really done a lot of wonderful things. Here's just a few examples. Near Transit, Noma, Merrifield. We know how to do this work in all corners of the region, and it's already happening and it's already being prioritized. So that's great. Next slide. Well, walking and biking to transit can still be a challenge. We obviously can't turn things around. It's going to take a lot of time to turn around what was essentially a century of planning that's in development, which is often very auto-oriented. Here you see pictures from the region. These are all within close proximity of high-capacity transit stations. Some cases, sidewalks are narrow or certainly not ADA friendly. In some cases, sidewalks are just disappear. That's sort of a kind of almost a cliche sort of phenomenon. We all know about these places, which can be just a few blocks away from high capacity transit stations. So next slide. So this is the project, the Transit Within Reach project, a quick overview. Again, we're identifying this list of transit access focus areas. They're going to be regionally prioritized. This is a prioritized list of 49 places. The purpose of this is, first of all, to implement the long-range transportation plan of the TPB, Visualize 2045. But we have a specific idea in mind here as well, the second bullet point. We want to use the TAFA designations as a criterion for selection for the TLC program, the Transportation Land Use Connections Program, which provides technical assistance for small planning studies, and also for the TAP program, which is a federal program that provides funding for capital improvements, particularly for bike ped improvements. We may in the future seek funding for these kinds of locations. We've been encouraged to do that in the past. And finally, we want to encourage our members at the state, local, and level, and as well as private sources to fund these kinds of improvements. Next slide, please. So just a couple words about Visualize 2045. I'm going to really, my presentation and Mike Farrell's presentation, which is next, are sort of go hand in hand. There were 2 aspirational initiatives in Visualize 2045. There were 7 aspirational initiatives, and 2 of them focused on non-motorized access. You folks may remember that the aspirational initiatives were really conceptual. They're good ideas. And so what we realized is we should apply some geographic specificity to these ideas. Sort of the Visualize said, you know, this is what we should generally be doing. So now we're generally saying this is where it makes sense to prioritize these efforts. So the board directed us to pursue this project in December of 2018, and then we're coming back to you today with our final results, or our draft results, I should say. Next slide. We're building on past work. I just need to shout out to particularly the WMATA study. We did a study. I looked at 25 rail stations about 5 years ago, but the WMATA Metro Rail Station Investment Strategy really did, I think, really sort of elevate this idea of walk sheds in our region. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but really kind of highlighted the need to increase station access around high capacity transit. Next slide. So these are the principles. Our sort of overarching principle was to keep it simple because we wanted to have a robust methodology, but we also really wanted to provide a lot of opportunity in an iterative fashion for local priorities to be woven into the final list of TAFAs. So starting out, we wanted to prioritize places where the impact would be greatest. Where there are deficiencies, where's there demand? Those are the 2 Ds we looked at. Where is it difficult to walk and bike, and where there are people who might want to walk and bike, or maybe do currently want to walk and bike, but they're obstructed. Secondly, we decided with this project we were going to look at places, not projects per se. We didn't want to identify specific sidewalks and trails through this study because we felt like those things are changing all the time, and it was most appropriate for us at a regional level to identify areas around stations and leave it up to our members to identify the specific projects. And finally, the last bullet point there is kind of woven into most of COG TPB work, regional balance, local priorities. All jurisdictions in our region that have at least one high capacity transit station area are going to have at least one priority station area, one TAFA on our list. As I mentioned earlier, we have 130 square miles, and if any jurisdiction has a piece of that land, we wanted them to have an opportunity for it to be reflected on this list. And then finally, the final bullet point, again, we've spent 8 months going back and forth with our members, trying to refine this and make sure that their local priorities are reflected in our list. Next slide. So the baseline, our starting point for analysis, we developed a list of station areas that met these criteria. First of all, high capacity transit. What are the, this is based on a standard TPB definition for, I think, a couple decades. Metro rail, commuter rail, BRT, light rail, streetcar. Those are the stations we identified initially. After some interesting discussions with our members, we decided to add a supplemental list of bus-only transit centers. It's very true. A lot of, and in this region, bus services are increasingly getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. A lot of these places have a lot of ridership. They have a lot of lines transferring, so people are getting on and off, and pedestrian and bicycle access in some of those locations is super important. So we added a supplemental list of bus-only transit centers, places that were particularly sort of had high frequency numbers and high ridership. The cutoff for this in the baseline was the year 2030. All stations that are either in place or will be in place by 2030, according to our long-range plan, of course. And finally, activity center designation. We've got 141 activity centers in this region. That's really the cornerstone for our land use policy. These are places where we would like to see more jobs and households. So that was one of the criteria that we only looked at places that were in activity centers. So with these criteria, 200 station areas move forward. We had identified 208 station areas that met the criteria and moved forward to our analysis. Next slide. These are the key factors. I'm going to get into some more detail in a minute, but just generally, this is what we use for our analysis. Where is it difficult to walk and bike? Where is there significant potential demand for walking and biking? And where are there vulnerable populations, particularly places where people are transit dependent and sort of don't have any choice but to walk and bike? So those are the three factors we used in the analysis. Let me go through them one by one. Next slide, please. Walk sheds. The TPB has seen a number of presentations, and I think a number of you folks have seen these in other situations as well. It's a really compelling way to think about the ability to walk to and from a transit center. Walk shed is used to identify locations where walking and biking to transit is relatively difficult. That's how we used it. Walk shed is a catchment area in which the outer perimeter represents the distance that people are anticipated to be willing to walk to a central destination. Planners generally assume that folks are going to be willing to walk about 10 minutes on average. That's about half a mile. And that's a maximum we can expect them to walk to and from a train station. So as the crow flies, that's the circle around these stations. And we have circles on a web map that's available that Charlene Howard developed. The outer limits of the half mile forms a perfect circle around the stations. But in reality, we know that half a mile of walking is often much longer than the geometric radius. Blocks are sometimes very long, sidewalks may be missing, or there may be barriers that obstruct the direct path. So as routes become more and more circuitous, the distance covered by a half mile walk, the actual walk shed, and those are the polygons you see here, is often much tighter than the half mile radius would suggest. That walk shed can be expanded, and that's basically what we would like to see by bridging barriers, creating new connections with sidewalks, and other crosswalks, those kinds of things, and enhancing existing connections to transit stations. So this was the basis, the starting point for our analysis. Staff identified walk sheds for all 208 station areas, and we calculated the percentage of coverage within each half mile for each station area. Next slide. Number two, where is there demand for walking and biking? There are various ways in which we thought about analyzing this, decided we would focus on a fairly simple approach using the cooperative forecast for housing and jobs. The presence of higher densities was assumed for us to represent a current or latent demand for walking or biking to transit. So we looked at traffic analysis zones associated with the stations and summarized the combined population and employment densities for each station area for the year 2030. And we developed an indexed score for each jurisdiction. Next slide. And finally, vulnerable populations. You know, we like to think, well, you know, we're trying to reduce driving in the region. A lot of times if people can't walk to transit, they'll just drive. But in a lot of cases, people don't have cars, or driving is really sort of, you know, not an option for them in their families. And that's particularly true in disadvantaged communities. So we used equity emphasis areas as a way to highlight the locations where these kinds of populations might be particularly located. I think the TPB should know that equity emphasis areas are geographies that have been approved by the board. It's our primary tool for regional environmental justice analysis. But for the purposes of this study, the equity emphasis areas really represent those places where people are more likely to be transit dependent. Good news here is of the 208 station areas that we analyzed, 164 of them are in equity emphasis areas. And out of our final list, we have 49 TAFAs, and 43 of them are in equity emphasis areas. So I think we're doing a good job of focusing attention on these locations. Next slide. Here's a graphic that just describes our process here. Again, these factors on the left fed into a preliminary staff list. But we developed our first list in the winter and went back and forth with the jurisdictions, refining it, changing the methodology, changing some of the inputs and sort of the information that we got, and resulting in the final draft list, which was released a couple weeks ago. Next slide. Here's the methodology. This is really extensively explained in the memo. So if folks have questions about this, you can either ask me now or we can talk about this offline. But we developed a composite score for each station area, and we used those factors that I mentioned with the weights that are identified there. Then we identified a preliminary staff list for the whole region. We did our first cut. We identified the target number of TAFAs for each jurisdiction. We also eliminated the stations that were already walkable. If a station, McPherson Square might have scored high, but we knocked it off the list because we don't need to improve walkability there. And then finally, we identified station areas for each jurisdiction for our preliminary list. But as I mentioned already, we didn't stop there. We talked with our members. We learned that in some cases, our assumptions about walkability may be wrong. Places may be more walkable, less walkable. Same thing with density. Some places are slated for development and it wasn't necessarily reflected in the information that we had. So we went back and forth for the last 6 to 8 months, adjusting the list and having these discussions. And next slide, please. And we came up with this. This is our final draft list, or it's the list that we have now and we're releasing to you. Again, we're interested in your questions and comments either now or we can take them over the coming weeks. The board will be asked to approve this list in July. We have 49 of these locations. I'll just say, and this is sort of described in the memo, this is in 17 of our member jurisdictions. 23 of these locations are metro rail stations, so many of them are not, but a number of them are. They include stations that are already on the ground, as well as those that will be in place, some in the near future, Purple Line, Silver Line Phase 2. As I mentioned already, 43%, that's 88% of them are in equity emphasis areas. Let's just have a look at the list. Next slide. I'm not going to go through the list in detail. One thing that just as a side note, I was super excited to see that a couple of TLC projects are here. For example, number 6, the College Park, the West Campus Purple Line station in College Park. We're funding some engineering work to improve access to that station in Prince George's County, also in Riggs Road over near Langley Park. Same thing for Herndon. We're funding a micromobility feasibility study out there for the future Silver Line station out there. Next slide. Again, just some sort of somewhat random observations. Woodbridge is on the list, which I was really pleased about. We just finished a TLC project a few weeks ago that looked at safe routes to school improvements in Woodbridge that are within the station area. So we're really obviously focused on getting people to and from transit, but these improvements will help kids get to and from school safely, will help people get to retail and to jobs, and maybe they won't even ride transit, but generally these improvements are community building and they're important for the region and they definitely have regional significance. So next slide. So wrapping it up, this is an information item to you folks today. We're going to be talking about it and getting some feedback over the next few weeks, but presenting this back to you for approval, requesting approval on July 22nd. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Thank you, John. I'm going to mix it up this time and I'm going to start upside down and see if WMATA or the other agencies have any questions.
Thank you, Chair Russell. Yes. Again, this is Mark Phelps for Sham. I first want to congratulate John, Charlene, and Nicole. This is great work. We're really happy with the product, and we really appreciate the way that your team engaged WMATA as well as jurisdictional staff several times in the creation of this and the structure of your framework and your assessment. We think it's going to be a useful and powerful tool actually for the entire region, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and the staff to make it even more useful and have greater application. I do want to call out one item that you mentioned at the very beginning for special attention, and that was the 3% of the region's land within these high capacity transit station areas. I know that I talked about this at the tech committee meeting, And I can tell everybody that this is a very important issue for Sean that you'll probably hear about again when this comes up in July. And that is the way that we tend to report transit mode use among commuter reports and other types of TPB work products. It's often done in a vacuum as the percentage of commuters who use transit. It doesn't really bring the land use facts or context into the discussion. So we want to be able to work with TPB staff to figure out a better way to explain this, that when you see something like a 17% commute mode share for transit, but you look at the fact that only 3% of the region has walk and bike access to transit, that's actually pretty great performance. And there's a lot of room for improvement, a ton of room for improvement. So I just wanted to note that anytime we talk about mode shares, and probably not even just about transit, but about mode share in general, we should be placing in the context of land use patterns.
Yeah, excellent point.
Thanks. Anyone else from OMARA or other agencies? All right, let's see. That would put Virginia next. Anyone from Virginia?
I have a comment. Bob here.
Go ahead. Mr. Brennan?
Just want to remind John that number 28 on the list, Ashburn, was also a TLC project many years ago.
Yeah.
And it probably wasn't even known as Ashburn back then. It was probably 772. But anyways, that led to a lot of good things that will eventually be happening around that station. So thank you, TPB and COG, for supporting that.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anybody else from Virginia?
Madam Chair, Dave Snyder, just a quick comment. I think West Falls Church will see a lot of exciting development in the future. And so the focus on making that station more walkable for everyone in the area is a great emphasis to make. My other question is on the East Falls Church station, which is actually in Arlington County, but abuts Falls Church. Is it one of the ones listed? And if so, or if not, why not?
It is not listed, Mr. Snyder. It didn't make the cut in terms of I believe it was the density measure. So that was, and we did discuss this with Arlington to make some adjustments, but it didn't rise to the top. I should mention that this is something we don't have a plan per se, but it would be logical that we would be updating the list on a somewhat regular basis. So, and we could also reconsider the methodology in the future, but at this point, it's not on the list.
Okay, I just wondered why. Thanks much.
And if I could add,
information about that too.
Mr. Chairman, if I could also add, the entire transit access focus area study, the idea behind this, there are about 210 high capacity transit station areas that are within an activity center or within half a mile of an activity center. Improvements at all of them are important. So we had said out of all of them, and some of them might be of a higher priority for a local jurisdiction for other considerations. But from the TPB's regional outlook or a regional perspective, can we prioritize some of those 210 not to preclude other stations? So we developed that criteria. So that was just our way of saying, and that's, I agree with John, that as some of these projects get done, we ought to revisit this and update this list, particularly if this can serve as a supporting case to make for funding, which I know that everybody is challenged to find enough of.
If I could respond to the East Falls Church comment real quick. This is Danielle Arlington. Mr. Snyder, we really appreciate that. We completely agree that East Falls Church is an area that merits investments and improvements. Needs them, deserves them. We think it's a priority for Arlington. We understand TPB's constraints. There were, I think, only going to be 3 of these listed in Arlington. We have a lot of transit stations and a lot of needs. So we very much appreciate both perspectives on that, and certainly are committed to improving the situation.
Thank you. Anyone else from Virginia? Okay, we'll move to Maryland.
Hi, Chair Russell. It's Bridget Newton from Rockville. My question may be the same as Mr. Snyder's, and Conti's response may answer that. I'm wondering about the Rockville station. I see Twinbrook, but I don't see the town center.
Again, that was a based upon our analysis and discussions with the Rockville staff. The Twinbrook station rose to the top. We designated a sort of a limited number of station areas that would be included on this list for each jurisdiction, and so we had to be somewhat selective. Again, as Conti mentioned, they're all important, and I'll say that through the TLC program in the past, we've funded studies that have looked at Rockville and have looked at East Falls Church. So this is not going to be something that we completely ignore, but for this list, we were trying to be somewhat selective and limited.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Neil Harris from Gaithersburg. I guess I'm going to come at this from the same direction of wondering why out of 3 high capacity stations, the Metropolitan Grove was chosen. It feels like it's more accessible and by walking and biking than the other 2, and probably less exposed to the vulnerable population. Plus, the transit center at Lake Forest Mall, given the potential redevelopment project at Lake Forest, seems like one that would be likely to be more of a high priority focus going forward. So I'd just be curious what criteria were used to choose Metropolitan Grove over the other 2.
Again, and this actually may be something that we should just talk about sort of individually offline. Metropolitan Grove, I do recall, had a extremely constrained walk shed. So it was one of those things that sort of rose to the top of the list for that reason. But this, and we did talk, we had a nice, very full conversation with the Gaithersburg staff. But Mr. Harris, I think it'd be a good idea for us to revisit that, and we can include you in that discussion.
I think that would be great. And it's actually staff that came to me and asked that question, which is why I'm asking it of you. So yes, we'd love to have an offline conversation.
We definitely want to get that right. Yeah.
Okay. This is Councilmember Denny Taveras. I did want to say that, John, you guys did amazing work. I think you definitely have the pulse, at least within Prince George's County, of, within Suitland, National Harbor, and in the areas that have vulnerable communities, at least in my district, in District 2. And the only thing I would say, at least in my district, is just looking forward, there will be a high volume of development in and near West Hyattsville, which is one of the most biked, transit stations in that particular area. And it'll be interesting over the next couple of years to see that level of activity and, and how we can assist in expanding options there as well. In addition to what's happening, a huge development in North Brentwood that's also projected to occur. So between those, that would lead them very closely to the West Hyattsville metro stop and feed into that metro stop.
Thank you.
And I just want to mention, I don't know what the one thing I did see that was a little bit missing was maybe, and that could just be because of ridership, is just looking at the Chevrolet central stations, and again, that just could be a density issue, but I'm
going to jump in here and make an observation that I think each jurisdiction is trying to make a case to add their locations onto the list, and I think those conversations can happen offline.
I'm just talking forward.
In fairness, all of you. and all worthwhile, but we're moving through our time here. We still have another item to address. I want to make sure that if you have, jurisdictional concerns about those, please do reach out to John offline. And I'm just going to ask if there are any more general questions about this study and these recommendations. And we got to Maryland, I think DC. We haven't heard from DC yet, and then that'll be the last question. Okay, great. I appreciate everyone's advocacy for their jurisdictions. It's what we're supposed to do. So thank you. Thank you, John, for a really great product, and we look forward to seeing how we can make progress with it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, on to our last item. We're a little behind schedule, but that's okay. We're going to catch up. The last item we'll be briefed on today is the National Capital Trail Network. It's also the final product coming out of staff's work over the past year. It's also something that Charles Allen chairmanship was directed to have staff work on. And another way we can realize a few of the aspirational initiatives we adopted in 2018 as part of Viz 2045. Mike Farrell is going to brief us on the product developed. This is a draft. We'll take action on this next month. I'm particularly excited about this since this is yet another relatively low-cost way we connect the different and distant parts of the region. And these are the types of transportation investment that provides not just commute options, but truly improves the quality of life and advanced sustained means of travel for work and non-work purposes. So Mike, take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much. Hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so if you could advance to the next slide, please. All right, so National Capital Trail Network is something that, we have a pretty long history with. We're going to go, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about, some of the history of the development of the National Capital Trail, our more recent activities. I'll go over, how we selected this network, what goes in, what goes out, and then I'll present the draft map. And some of the things that we're going to do with this network, once it's been adopted. So next slide, please. All right, so some of you may recall that we used to call this the National Capital Trail. We used to call it the Bicycle Beltway. It was kind of inspired by the Atlanta Beltline. Then Councilmember Jay Fizzett, way back around 2014, called upon Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee to look into designating a similar circumferential route, right around the core of the Washington region. So Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee did identify such a route together with the National Park Service and other partners. And the National Park Service adopted that route into their paved trails plan in 2016 with some modifications and ultimately rebranding it as the National Capital Trail. The Capital Trails Coalition, which is housed at WABA and Washington Area Bicyclists Association and Rails to Trails, they adopted the National Capital Trail idea, but then expanded it into a trails plan that covered the urban core and also the inner suburban jurisdictions of the Washington region. And that was completed in the fall of 2018. So next slide, please. So October 2018, the TPB adopted the National Capital Trail as an aspirational element of Visualize 2045, one of the 7 unfunded initiatives. And shortly thereafter, in response to recommendations which the TPB had requested from the Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee and other committees to enhance the implementation of the unfunded initiatives, the TPB passed a resolution which directed TPB staff to build upon the National Capital Trail to create a regional trail network that would extend into all the TPB member jurisdictions. So next slide, please. So some of the activities that we've been doing to get this done, it's taken a little bit longer than we had hoped, but we have gotten it done. First of all, we reviewed and adapted the Capital Trails Coalition's information and routing. And the Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee essentially blessed or endorsed the work that the Capital Trails Coalition had done, which we had been a part of and TPB staff had been a part of while it was happening. We also obtained additional information from the jurisdictions that were not in the original areas. So Charles, Frederick, Loudoun counties, or that had been since updated, or updated since the Capital Trails Coalition had done its work, i.e. Montgomery County. So as I mentioned, the Bike Ped Subcommittee endorsed the Capital Trails Coalition's network. It adapted its, endorsed trail selection criteria for what would go in and out, and an initial draft map, which was produced in January of 2020. The TPB Technical Committee then reviewed that map at its February meeting and endorsed a revised map for TPB review in June. So next slide, please. I think I just want to go over, what the criteria for inclusion in the National Capital Trail is and kind of what it is. I mean, it is a regional network of long-distance multi-use paths. So a lot of local trails are not included. A lot of other important on-street facilities, such as protected bike lanes, are not included. It is intended to be accessible for people of all ages and abilities. It was designed for non-motorized use, which effectively means less than 20 miles an hour, and to be suitable for both transportation and recreation. The standard for existing paths would be 8 feet, which was like the old standard, and then 10 feet for new construction. Limited number of on-street facilities were permitted. Those facilities would be required to be protected from moving traffic. And again, an exception to the exception where we truly needed connectivity to the regional network and there was no other way, we did allow some on-road facilities to be included, especially if they were low stress, low volume type of facilities. And of course, projects can be existing or planned, but they must be in an approved agency plan. So next slide, please. So this is the National Capital Trail network as it was adopted, or sorry, no, the National Capital Trail, not yet, network, as it was adopted in October 2018 as part of Visualize. So you can see it's pretty much like 3 interconnected loops covering, just the very core of the urban region. And it was, much of it was complete. So moving on to the next slide, please. So this is the National Capital Trail network as it stands now. You can see that the existing trails are in green, planned trails are in red. You can see that there is a link there to the interactive map, which is available online. And if you want to get zoom in and get a closer look at your own jurisdiction, you can click on that link, which Sergio has put in the chat box, and click on any of one of these trails and get basic information on it. So I guess next slide, please. So we're hoping that this will come back to TPB for adoption at a future meeting, possibly in July. Major use of this is to help us, for our own purposes, is to help us prioritize funding for the Transportation Alternatives Program, for the Transportation Land Use Connection Programs. We will update it possibly annually in the future to reflect new facilities and new information. And it will also be included in the update of the overall regional bicycle and pedestrian plan which will take place in fiscal year 2021. And I guess, I mean, I would be remiss not to mention really the tremendous amount of work which, Charlene and the GIS staff have put into gathering all this data. I would say gathering data is always harder than you think it's going to be. Trying to get the uniformity, trying to get the basic information in the shape files and the GIS layers that we needed was, I think, quite a bit of work. And I'd also like to thank the staff, especially at the outer jurisdictions, i.e. Charles, Prince William, City of Manassas, Loudoun County, Frederick City and Frederick County, and also Montgomery County for giving us the information from their new bicycle master plan. So it's been a long road getting this together, but I'm excited that we finally got it done, and I'm looking forward to using it as a tool for analysis in the future. So I guess that's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Mike. We'll open the floor to questions. And again, let's start from the bottom and start with WMATA and other agencies. Okay, Virginia? Maryland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, I think this is great work. I think many of us, yes, it's Earl from Maryland Department of Transportation. I think many of us have noticed and read some of the articles about an increase in bicycle use over the last few months, given some of the dynamics of our situation with the COVID-19. I'd also like to just put on the record for future updates to the plan, because I know you mentioned you'll be doing them annually, that governors of Virginia, Governor Northam and Governor Hogan, last November announced the Capital Beltway Accord, where the construction of the new American Legion Bridge will also include new bicycle and pedestrian paths across the Potomac River, connecting new and planned trails. Mr. Farrell may want to reach out to VDOT and MDOT staff to get the more detailed plans at the right time to make sure that these are integrated into the plan moving forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll do that, and we know that some of this information is already, especially for the interjurisdictions, it's already old enough that it's due for another look. It's at least a year old at this point, and I think that we will need to do some updates.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else from Maryland? And the District of Columbia. All right, fantastic. Great work on everything. The next meeting is scheduled for July 22nd, 2020, which is, please note, that's the fourth Wednesday of the month, not the usual third Wednesday. And so thank you, everyone. Be safe and stay well. And we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time.
First time.
Take care, everyone.
You too.